First, let me say how excited I am to have you guys here. It's a little bit different from my days seeing you guys interviewing you now. So I'm really excited to have you joining us. Maria, your experience in Washington obviously runs deep. For anybody out there who doesn't know, you're a spokesperson for Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2008, a key surrogate for Obama's team in the general that time. And then in 2012, you've specialized in Latino outreach your whole career. You're also the spokesperson for the DNC in the early 2000s. And I didn't realize you were a spokesperson at INS in Commerce. So yeah. You've got a lot going on. And Alice, we worked together while you were with Governor Huckabee and then with Senator Cruz, me at CNN, and you with the campaign. So we worked on that together. But you've also worked with Rick Santorum, Michelle Bachmann, an RNC surrogate for the 2016 election, comm strategy for the NRSC, right? And the NRCC.
Right.
And Concerned Women for America, Rick Scott for governor, deputy secretary of state in Arkansas, which I should have known all this, but I started reading your bios and, always so impressed with you, but even more so now.
This goes to show that I can't keep a job.
Well, it's sort of the nature of the business, right? And you're a fellow at Harvard now, and I am so excited to have you both on. You have this great podcast, Hot Mics from Left to Right, and sort of going back to your roots as a newscaster with the Alice Stewart show, which I didn't know, but I'm going to have to pull up some old episodes of.
Oh, no.
So we'll talk a little bit more about the podcast later because I do have a couple of questions for you. But we're just very lucky to have you guys on. So we'll just dive right in to the details of the RNC and the DNC and sort of everything that's going on in this election. So first things first, I'd love to get your takes on what's going on. Was the DNC successful? How's the RNC going so far? Whoever wants to start. So.
I'll go since the DNC was first, and then Alice can go with the RNC. I think the DNC was incredibly successful for what we wanted to accomplish, especially because we were the first ones to go and no one knew what to expect, including us, the people who were helping to plan it. So there were a lot of unknowns. We knew how it wanted to look and how we wanted it to feel, but because this was such an unprecedented endeavor, because we're in such unprecedented times, again, we had no idea how it was going to be received and how the people out there were going to feel as they watched it, right? We wanted to definitely make that connection, not just with our base, but with moderates, with independents, with disaffected Republicans. And as you saw, we showcased all of that. But I think front and center, what we were able to do was two things: showcase the incredible diversity, not just of the party, but of the country. And so therefore making the connection that it's the Democratic Party, the one that truly represents what this country looks like. And the second one was to make this an election that is a referendum on Donald Trump's last 4 years, specifically on his policies having to do with COVID-19. We're now surpassing 180,000 Americans dead from a pandemic. And we're making the point that it didn't have to be like that if Donald Trump had taken it seriously and had been competent and able to offer a national solution. And then we're also making the contrast with character in terms of Donald Trump, who can't show empathy, who is always about self-dealing, who has had a lot of history of criminality and corruption, versus Joe Biden, who has been a dedicated public servant all his life and whose center philosophy in terms of governing is showing empathy and putting himself in the shoes of the people that he is governing. So I think we were able to do all of that. And just 2 seconds on the RNC, and then I'll let Alice go. I think the RNC, as much as the speeches that I have heard, most of them have made my stomach turn. I think Tim Scott was terrific, though. I will give him that. I think that they are achieving what they want to achieve. But I also think that what they're doing is not necessarily expanding their electorate, but going deep into it. Because what they're trying to do, I think, and Alice will correct me if I'm wrong, and it sounds like it from everything that Donald Trump is doing and saying, is that they want to maximize the vote that they know that they already have. But I don't think that it is helping them to go into the votes of suburban women, of minorities, even though they tried to make it look like they were, but I don't think that'll work. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I'll start off with the DNC, and a lot of what Maria said, I do agree with. I thought from what they needed to accomplish, I thought they hit it out of the park in terms of energizing their base, certainly of showing and displaying the vice president as a man of great empathy and character. There's no disputing that. He is someone, I've got a lot of friends that work for him. He is a kind, caring man of great empathy. And we saw that continue to come out. And that was on display. A lot of people sharing stories with him, and certainly in the way that he spoke, was successful with that. They did also do, as one of the key components of what needs to happen right now, is not just energizing your base, but reaching out to swing voters. They were able to do that by getting in a lot of the never Trumpers and people that just don't like this president, Republicans, and having them voice their opposition to the president and speak against him. But the truth is, the president won without their votes in 2016, and the same would hold true in 2020. I did not and would not go after any of the campaigns based on the technical difficulties, as the Russian judge would say, because we are, as Maria said, we're in uncertain times, we're in uncharted territories. But now looking back at 2 days of the Republican convention, I'm shocked that the DNC and the Democrats, with all of Hollywood at their disposal, didn't have a little bit more showmanship and glitz and glamour. But as I said, they were really trying to adhere to the constraints of social distancing and really working to show this great country. I think the roll call with people all over the country was fantastic, and being able to see different people in different states in their own element, I thought that was really nice. But that was helpful to their base. Transitioning into the Republican convention, 2 days down, 2 to go, I think it's gone tremendous. And I say that for 3 reasons. I wrote an op-ed that's on CNN today in terms of what the Republicans need to do. They need to throw out red meat to their base. They need to throw shade to the opposition, and they need to throw out their welcome mat to swing voters and those on the fence. Their base, the forgotten man, middle America, they talked about them. Also evangelicals, with the woman who talked about abortion, that really connected with the pro-life wing of the president's base, as well as the man who started the prison program and that talked about redemption. A couple of the other quick points, not to go on, but the other fact of throwing shade to Joe Biden, everyone says Donald Trump is a racist. Well, we had the Attorney General of Kentucky speak last night saying, Joe Biden, you need to watch what you're saying because you've made critical comments before, and I'm a black man, I'm not in chains, and I'm a Republican voting for Trump. And the last point, reaching out to undecideds and those on the fence, I think the number one way they did that was with Melania Trump. Mm-hmm. She brought out the softer side of Donald Trump and really took the edge off of him. And a lot of people that say, I'm not going to vote for Trump because I don't like him, they were able to see the softer side of him. And it's kind of one of those unspoken communication tactics that I think was masterful on her part. So we'll see if they're able to swing over some of those that haven't made up their minds yet.
Well, and you both mentioned Tim Scott and Melania. Who do you think Melania was successful perhaps in reaching those, you said swing voters or people who maybe wouldn't have, what voting blocks does Trump need to reach, and who are the speakers that are most successful in reaching it? Was Melania? Was it Tim Scott? Who was it? And who do you think may be successful as we move forward?
If I can weigh in on this, I was doing some research on this, and on that topic, Ron Brownstein, who I'm on CNN with this evening, he wrote a great piece. He's really good at the polls and crosstabs and college-educated white people and high school educated Latinos. He's great with the crosstabs. But he wrote a piece and mentioning 2018, but also 2020. The number one voting bloc that Republicans and Democrats need to reach out to are millennials. We have millennials now. The voting bloc is outpaced baby boomers, and that is significant. So I think from both sides, whether we're talking about college educated or not, reaching out and communicating to millennials is key for both sides.
I think I totally agree with Alice. And, you know, as somebody who does a lot of work in the Latino community, that is especially the case with the Hispanic community, because 60% of the Hispanic community are millennials. Right now, Joe Biden has a huge, he's way ahead with millennials, right? He's got a huge bump with millennials vis-a-vis Trump. That doesn't mean that we're going to take anything for granted, because we can't. But you asked about Melania's speech or Tim Scott's speech, or whether either of them did what they needed to do to reach out to the voters that Republicans need to get. You know, it is so hard to say right now, because I do think that this is a much closer race, and I know that we're going to get into the polls in a second. But what I will say is that in 2018, white, suburban, college-educated women fled the Republican Party because of Trump's character and his rhetoric, specifically what was happening on the border with the policy that Trump put in place to separate families and to rip babies from the arms of their mothers, and how Trump conducted himself publicly on Twitter in terms of insults and, you know, cussing and all of that. They completely turned their back on that. Trump hasn't done anything to fix that. I don't think that a speech by Melania trying to smooth out his rough edges, talking about her Be Best campaign that focuses on fixing bullying on social media, when her husband is the #1 culprit of bullying on social media. You know, the American people are smarter than that. So even though they tried, and I think they had to try, I don't think it was successful, or I don't think it will be successful.
And forgive me, my dog is having a heart attack in the background over something. So if I jumped and smiled, it's because I've got this terrier who's, you know, convinced we're under attack. So forgive me.
Mine is taking a nap because she's tired from sleeping all day. But if I could just follow up on one quick point that she made about the suburban women. Look, suburban moms and moms everywhere, they're concerned about the safety of their homes, safety of their kids, and getting their kids back to school. And we have
one of those.
Yes, and this president has really made law and order a key focus of this administration and this campaign and his reelection, but also getting kids back to school. I mean, everyone can agree we want to be safe and we want to adhere to the CDC guidelines, but getting kids back to school is great for their intellectual well-being, but their emotional well-being, and also for the parents' well-being and their economic well-being for the family. And that is something that this administration is really working hard to do that in a safe way that is specific to each different area. If COVID is bad in one area, we need to take different measures. But I think that's important, and that's the kind of thing that will appeal to suburban women.
Well, it's really interesting. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I don't think, you're right, Alice, it would be if it was credible, but coming from the Donald Trump administration, it just isn't, because he was threatening the public schools that weren't going to open in person, saying that if they don't open in person, they're going to take away their funding. That is not a president that understands how moms feel and how terrified we are of sending our kids to school when most schools can't afford to have desks 6 feet or more apart, to have, you know, all of the disinfecting tools and the masks and the dividers and all of that. So, you know, he or frankly other people can say that, but it's just not true. And on the issue of law and order, you know, he will say that and he will continue to say that, but when you have most people that have been around him Steve Bannon being the most one, the most recent one that has the closest advisors to him. They either have been arrested, indicted, or in jail. So, that kind of falls on deaf ears when you're trying to convince anybody anyway.
Well, and it seems, as we're moving forward sort of on this law and order theme, we're dealing with another tragic situation involving a police shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And no matter which way you slice it, a man has been paralyzed. Don Lemon, CNN, was trending this morning on
Love
Twitter.
him. Love that man.
For saying rioters should stop what they're doing. Do we think that Democrats will face electoral consequences like he suggested, or, as this becomes more of a sort of wedge issue, trying to maybe reach some of those suburban women voters who Alice says want law and order versus they don't, or, tired of rioting. And then you add in the completely, counter argument that there are all these different groups. You've got Antifa apparently going in. There's claims about
white
supremacists and vigilantes, and you have a 17-year-old under arrest for murder at this point. I mean, it feels almost icky to ask how this plays out in electoral politics, but it doesn't seem avoidable at this point.
Yeah.
Is this something that you think voters will be making up their minds on? And how do the candidates respond?
I think Dawn is right, frankly, in that Democrats do need to be more vociferous and speak out more strongly against the rioters. Now, they have been doing that, and all of the mayors have been doing that. You have the mayor of Atlanta who spoke out more strongly than I've ever seen anyone speak out against the rioters and against the people who were engaged in criminal acts, because that's what they are, right? Let's just say it how it is. Those people are criminals. Those are very different from the peaceful protesters that are out on the streets. And I was one of those when there were protests here in DC, in terms of demanding once and for all a reckoning in this country for social justice and for equality when it comes to policing. I think in general, Democrats need to do two things: continue to speak out strongly against the criminal elements, whether they are, people on our side whose anger just has boiled over, or whether they are white supremacists who are trying to cause trouble. Because either way you look at it, a rioter and people who destroy property and who hurt people, they're criminals, right? And they should be labeled as such and should be spoken out against. That's very different than the peaceful protesters, which the majority are. And right now what we're seeing in polls, and CNN, Don Lemon showed one last night, where the majority of the country still believes that these protests are by far peaceful protests that are by people who are demanding what most of the country also believes is time that we give all of us, society, racial and social justice.
I think the thing that stands out more than anything is a key pillar of the Republican ideology, and that is peace through strength. And when you have a president who is offering to send federal law enforcement to these areas to help protect these cities and protect federal buildings and protect innocent business owners from these criminals who are indiscriminately destroying people's property and burning down buildings, when he is offering that kind of assistance, and we have Democrat leaders, mayors and governors saying, no thanks, we don't want it, and making up some nonsense about how that just further angers these criminals. That is nonsense. These criminals are grown-up people that need to take responsibility for their own actions, and for Democrats and liberals to say that these federal authorities instigated the tensions there is just hogwash. So if we had more Democrats saying, let's get more law enforcement in these areas and show that we have strength and we are standing united against people tearing down federal buildings, people looting and destroying property, that is the best way to go about doing it. But more importantly, the candidate or the party or the campaign that can put two two things together will be the winning candidate. And we had the mother of the victim in Wisconsin making an impassioned plea yesterday saying, please stop this violence. My son would not have wanted that. And she said, America is great when we act greatly. That is true. And then last night we had Melania saying we need to respond to this in a civil manner. The person that can put those two sides together and have a unified front, Republicans and Democrats, that's the winning formula. And these criminals are no different than COVID. This is a nonpartisan issue. It's a no-brainer. And for us to bring politics into these two horrible issues is really short-sighted, but this is the day and age that we're in. But the key is having a united front, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Americans, to try and put a stop to this.
Yeah. Well, I think the question is, who can provide the best leadership on this, right? That's what Americans are looking for. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's, what I'm looking for.
You're absolutely right. And I think that goes to what Alice said in terms of who will be the candidate and the party that will be able to credibly talk about what the country needs writ large, right? And as much as Donald Trump talks about law and order, and I do think that his base, for sure believes him on that. The thing that he's missing credibility on is that he wants to fix the issues of social justice, because when he calls the Black Lives Matter movement, Marxist and criminals, and puts them in with the same, paints them with the same brush as Antifa, that's when he loses more than half of the country.
Well, we're going to move on to some of the markets and get into some of the numbers that our traders really love. So a couple of months ago in our markets, it seemed like we were going to see a massive blue tidal wave. But now in places like North Carolina, if we scroll down to the 90-day, you can see that Republicans have taken a lead in the Electoral College there. Iowa, which had previously seen Joni Ernst neck and neck with Teresa Greenfield, now sees the Republican taking over. And Arizona is even tightening, if we can go to that for the presidential, that we've seen a little bit of that going on. And the market that suggested a clean sweep for Democrats a couple months ago is now 50-50. So, or maybe it was 50-50 this morning when I looked, but it's, obviously very close. The most recent, we've seen the same tightening in sort of the polls, the most recent being the CNBC Change Research poll. Biden still leads, and the only place where the poll differs from our markets is in North Carolina, where we have the president leading in North Carolina's Electoral College. What's going on? What is this, a natural tightening? Are we seeing something that what is the phenomenon that's sort of against this backdrop?
Alice, you want to go?
Yeah, first of all, I think clearly there has been such a large outcry amongst the Democrats, and this happens whenever there's an incumbent in the White House. He's not out there driving his message as much and rallying the troops. But when you have a Democratic primary like we've had, and I love primaries, they're so important to vigorous debate, deciding who's going to be the leader of the party. Primaries generally do generate interest and galvanize people. And when you have all these Democrats out on the campaign trail having events and having debates, they're naturally more engaged than, say, the Republican Party. And for them to have had the opportunity to garner the attention and the media and the discussion and the oxygen in the political room, there's a lot to be said for that. So just by the sheer nature of how primaries are with an incumbent in the White House, the energy was certainly behind Joe Biden as the Democrats all coalesced behind this one candidate. But what we're seeing now is, okay, now everyone, the dust has settled with the conventions behind us. This is where the rubber meets the road. And if you don't mind, if you can pull up the graph you had on the national trends, even though I don't necessarily focus a lot on national because these are state by state polls, but the trends of how these are going are certainly interesting to watch, because you see, it had the margin was so great with Joe Biden so far ahead, and now it's tightening up. But the key is just to watch the trends, and specifically in these battleground states, see how things are tightening up.
Yeah. So in our markets, we are seeing a little bit of that, but we aren't seeing it quite as much. So we had a little bit of a widening between them, but obviously our markets are a little bit different from polling. I think the 50-50 was the place that we had, if you had the clean sweep for Democrats across the board. So, but yeah.
So let me, if I could chime in here and
Right,
because I talk about this a lot on our podcast. I hate the polls that show the clean sweep. I hate the polls for Democrats. I hate the polls that show Joe Biden 15 points ahead. Why? Because it leads to complacency. And we saw that movie in 2016, and we know how it ends, and it's not a happy ending for us or the country, I would say. And so I actually like that we are seeing polls where it's tightening up. I like that we are seeing, battleground states tightening up, because it tells us that we cannot take anything for granted. The Biden campaign knows this. The DNC knows this. We have internal calls all the time and we say, we're not listening to these polls that have Joe Biden 15 points ahead, right? We cannot take anything for granted. We cannot leave anything on the table, because you never know what can happen. And we all talk about 2016 as a reminder. Now, having said that, I do believe Joe Biden is ahead. You see the poll of polls, and he's still a healthy 7 points ahead nationally. And the only battleground state that he is in tied right now is North Carolina in the poll of polls of battleground states. But, again, you never know what can happen between now and the election. I still do think the trends are in Joe Biden's favor, and one of the biggest reasons why is because of COVID-19, right? When you have Americans feeling the losses in their families and in their communities of people who did not have to die, and when you have still a huge gap or the absence of a national strategy when it comes to dealing with a pandemic, Americans understand, and we've seen the polls, right? They give Donald Trump extremely poor marks on how he has handled leadership with COVID. And he's done nothing to fix that. And in fact, one of the most jaw-dropping things that I saw happen at the RNC is that they're speaking as if the pandemic is over. If you saw Larry Kudlow, he actually used past tense when he was talking about COVID. We just surpassed 180,000 Americans dead by the pandemic. And so I think that is the big elephant in the room, no pun intended, for Republicans when they talk about this. But for Democrats, Allison, absolutely, we will keep talking about how this race is tightening up. Our base and our supporters out there, including independents, disaffected Republicans, many of which, and we saw at the DNC convention, they're voting for Biden. We cannot take anything for granted, and we have to assume, I would like to always assume that Donald Trump is ahead, so we get every single one of our people out to vote.
We had Liz Landers on last week, and a strategy question to you both, who said she had been up in Wisconsin and speaking to suburban women in Wisconsin. There aren't a lot of reporters out in the field. It's just not possible, and so, she asked them, and I thought this was a really fascinating question, do Kamala and Joe Biden need to come to Wisconsin? And will it be damaging if they don't? Two campaigns taking very different strategies. Is there talk at the DNC, and also Alice, do you think that, not showing up like Hillary Clinton didn't show up in 2016 in some of these states, do you think that that's going to be damaging? And will it undermine the very social distanced message that the Biden-Harris campaign has been pushing?
First of all, Liz is awesome. So if she's getting a pulse of the people, it's pretty accurate. And look, being socially distant and being an aggressive campaigner are not mutually exclusive. There are ways that they can go into these states and campaign and still adhere to the guidelines. And I think it would be absolutely mind-boggling if the DNC and the Biden campaign did not learn from the mistakes of Hillary Clinton and go into these states and truly campaign. As Maria said, they can't rest on their laurels. They can't take anything for granted, not just by the standpoint of if he's ahead in the polls right now, but that was a huge teachable moment in 2016 when Hillary did not go into those states and virtually spike the football in the third quarter. And I think if I don't expect anything else from the Democrats is that they do so because they learned from that. And it was a stinging lesson to learn because I know a lot of people that worked on that campaign. And so hopefully it was a lesson learned, but you can go out there and do it in a way that is safe.
That's right.
We had the events last night. Trump goes out to these rallies. I wish that the Republicans would be a little bit more of an example as to how they want other people to behave during COVID, wearing masks and socially distancing. I wish there would have been a little bit more of that throughout the convention, but I know that they're testing people before, during, and after all of these events. But I think it's important for us to practice what we preach, and you can do that. You can be safe, but also find new and creative and innovative ways to get out there and rally. Allie, you've been out there. Maria, you've been out there on the campaign trail. Voters in these states don't want to just want you to phone it in. They want to see you. They want to watch you interact. They want to see if you're genuine. And Joe Biden has all of those qualities. And Kamala, I think, is getting her sea legs about her. But the only way you're going to show that you can connect with people is if you go out and try and connect with people.
And there is certainly, like Alice said, there are ways to do it. You can go into these states and do small gatherings with safe social distancing, wearing masks, and then you can add to that a virtual and a digital component that will amplify that gathering or that event, out into broader neighborhoods or districts in that same state. So it's not like you can't do anything, but just like we had to do with the conventions, you just have to be creative and think outside the box.
Well, there's no substitute for a live event, right? There's no substitute for seeing Springsteen in concert. There's no substitute. Not that we're dealing with Springsteen on either case, but.
Well, and as you know, we spent a lot of time in Iowa together, Allie, and there's just no substitute for going to the state fair and eating a pork chop on a stick.
No.
People want to see you do that.
Yeah, they want to feel, there's an excitement that goes about with that. So a couple weeks ago, we were talking about Texas and Georgia in play for Dems. If Will can pull up some of those. And we've seen the same tightening. I mean, Texas is very much out of reach at this juncture when you look at our markets. And then if you look at Georgia, it's, sort of the same thing. Mm-hmm. What's going on? What slipped? I think it's sort of what I'm trying to get at.
Well, I wouldn't say anything slipped yet. Okay. If you look at the poll of polls in those states, okay. Donald Trump is up by 3 in Texas. The fact that we're even talking about Texas could even possibly be in play for the Democrats, I think, speaks volumes of the problems that the Republican Party is facing nationally. The fact that we're having this conversation and we're even including Texas and Georgia, again, speaks volumes about where we are. And we are there because both Georgia and Texas represent some of the key states that were ruby red, but because of the demographic changes that have happened and because of the huge challenge this president has had in understanding how to deal with these communities, to put it nicely, he's in trouble. Georgia, there is a huge African-American community in Georgia. In Texas, a huge Latino community in Texas. If you talk to the Democratic Party today in Texas, and I did, they won't bet their life savings that Texas will turn blue. but they would bet a pretty good amount of money that it's absolutely possible that it does.
Yeah.
So, again, we can take nothing for granted. The fact we're just happy and we think that it speaks volumes with where the country is and as well with the hard work that Democrats have done. The fact that we're even having this conversation, Allie, and we're talking about Texas and Georgia.
Would you be willing to put any, if you're looking at that market, where would you be willing to buy at Texas?
The Valley.
Yeah.
And, Dallas, right, the urban centers, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston for sure. Houston's a hugely Democratic city.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of the change is going to happen in the Valley area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maria, what do you think's going on in these places?
Maria,
Alex, sorry.
That's okay. I'm from Georgia and I lived in Texas on the Cruz campaign. And I can tell you that, as Maria said, these are two ruby red states, but they are certainly becoming purple. And I truly believe, just by the sheer nature of politics, that they will flip to blue at some point. And you have to acknowledge that the Stacey Abrams in that race really laid the groundwork for Democrats in Georgia. And I think Beto O'Rourke in Texas really laid the groundwork for Democrats in Texas. But I don't see that it flipping right now at this point, but they are making inroads. I know I've got good friends that are working on the Black Voters Matter campaign in Georgia. They are frustrated. They are furious with what they see as voter disenfranchisement and suppressing the votes. And they are putting a lot of money into Georgia and into Texas to really not just right wrongs they see of the past, but really turn out the vote. And they did that in the primary quite a bit. So what we're seeing is Democrats are seeing that, hey, there's an opportunity here and they're putting money into it. But at the same time, Republicans are doing so as well. And they're focusing on making sure that they get the right candidates at the right time to run in these states. But they can definitely feel the heat of Democrats on our heels.
Do you think Laura closing in on Texas provides an opportunity for either candidate, or do you see a threat? I mean, obviously Hurricane Katrina was a real crisis for President Bush. Do we see a similar? They've been battered over the years.
I hate this phrase, but never let a crisis go to waste. And this is a huge crisis that is on the way. And I'll say this, I've seen a lot of information already out of Senator Cruz's office on, how to evacuate, where to go, where to get information. And to the degree that you can, if you're running for office or you're currently in office, take this as an opportunity to basically do what you're getting paid to do and provide constituent services to those in need. And it is a real opportunity for people to show that you can be there in a time of crisis, not just when it's time to celebrate your victory, but you're going to be there in good times and bad. And this is where the rubber meets the road. And it's a good time, if we need it, we'll have another Chris Christie, Barack Obama moment where we have Republicans and Democrats working together to make sure that the needs of their communities are met.
I hope so, because, obviously there are a lot of lives at stake from what I can see the reporting. This is going to be a massively deadly storm. So I hope that that's right. And I hope that everyone, and I have seen that too, Alice, like every elected official is responding as they should. And then I think it's just, we'll see what happens afterward. I can almost guarantee you that the people around Donald Trump are not going to let him screw this up, because we're way too close to the election and it's Texas. So,
yeah. Well, we had Bradley Tusk on a while back, obviously had worked for Mike Bloomberg, and talks about, how you respond to the day-to-day governing. And so it can feed into a narrative of the president hasn't responded well to COVID if he doesn't respond well to this crisis. So I think, let's hope that everybody gets on board with that. Switch gears totally, why not? Markey and Kennedy has been kind of a nasty primary. We're coming up on it. We show Ed Markey blowing this out. What do you think this primary means for the future of Joe Kennedy's career, because it's been so nasty? And
I think it will be hard for him to survive an immediate next political move if he loses, meaning Joe Kennedy, right? But it's also, and I, right before we did this, I talked to two of my partners who are from Boston and are very close to both Kennedy and Markey. And they both told me that it will all come down to turnout. That, you know, Markey has been losing a lot of ground recently. That, you know, Kennedy is getting closer. And both of them said, you know, again, anything could happen and it will all come down to turnout, and they believe it will be a huge turnout, like at 1.3 million people.
Wow.
And they both said to me, which is interesting, so we'll see like what the outcome is, that it would be hard for them to imagine a Kennedy losing a race in Massachusetts. But you never know, right? So I'm as excited to see what the turnout of this is as you are and as the country is, Allison, because I do think it has been quite nasty. But I think politically, it is also good because it has energized all Democrats, right? No matter whether if you're for Markey or for Kennedy, to be energized this close to the election. And again, I know that, you know, Massachusetts, it's not a battleground state, but I think that this is such an election that we cannot leave any vote on the table. So if we can get every single registered voter out to vote in Massachusetts, you know, that makes me happy.
And I think just by sheer geography that they're so close to New Hampshire makes them a lot more politically attuned and engaged and involved. And when I lived in Cambridge last year, just the political, they're just more politically savvy, similar to the people in Iowa are. But look, Joe Kennedy has the benefit of youth, and he's young. And if this does not work out for him, if he doesn't win, he has plenty of time to regroup. He certainly isn't going to be hurting financially, but he has the benefit of taking this as an opportunity to maybe sit back and reassess and become a better candidate. But I wouldn't count him out. He is a very engaging, he is a really good retail politician. And if he decides to get out there and meet people and engage with people, he's super engaging, and he's a great speaker, and he really likes that part of it. And so if he works from now to election day to really continue to meet people, it could close even more. But, you know, there's always the surprise of the October surprise. So it remains to be seen.
So Kelly Loeffler and Doug Collins, Georgia, Alice, just August 19, we had them tied. Kelly Loeffler has obviously taken a lead. What do you think is going to take this race, and what does it mean for the general election?
A lot of this depends on, you know, obviously Trump has picked sides here to some degree for Loeffler, and that certainly was beneficial to her. I've spoken with the Republican Party chairman there, and he says that, you know, obviously the party is, you know, standing back. But Doug Collins, for such a long period of time, was such a huge Trump supporter, and it was really helpful to him. But now the fact that he's kind of sharing the stage is going to be interesting to see. But no matter what, no matter who comes out in that race, Georgia is going to come out for Donald Trump. And, you know, I'm not concerned with that as much, but that's going to be a dogfight to the very end for sure.
Again, that I think is good for Republicans because it energizes their base, right? So close to an election.
We're going to move on to Montana governor's race. Gianforte is running here, and then also the Montana Senate race. We've been watching Montana politics closely, mostly because I just live here. So it's a little selfish. This is another race that was close for Dems and is pulled away in favor of Steve Daines. How do you see this one swinging?
I think that one will be difficult for Dems. But again, we are, what, 70 days out from the election, maybe a little bit less.
I think you said in your podcast that, you know, a day is a year in politics or something.
A day is, yes, so 70 days is 70 lifetimes in politics.
Exactly.
So, you know, so again, anything can happen. And I really do think that even though, you know, obviously the White House will be won and lost state by state by the Electoral College, governorships matter, you know, Senate races matter, congressional races matter. So in that realm, every state matters, right? So this is certainly a state the Democrats have not given up on in terms of the governorship. And I think that it is something that they see as a possibility. If they are able to excite and energize and get all of their voters out, it's still a possibility. So right now we're at the point where, and I'm sure you'll probably hear this a lot, and I'm sure Alice and I will be saying this between now and the election, it really is all about turnout, and it will be all about which party and which candidate will be able to maximize their base and then convince enough of people who are on the fence. And by the way, can I just say this? I'm not convinced that there's a whole lot of people on the fence right now.
Yeah.
I really am not convinced by that. I think that the elusive swing voter, it is a lot less of a percentage this election than it was in elections past. So again, I think what that means for both parties and for all of the candidates is they have to maximize their supporters. I won't even say their base, because let's face it, the Republicans who are going to be voting for Biden are not our base, but we welcome them with open arms. And so I will call them Biden supporters or Democratic Party supporters, and vice versa, right? People who want to cross the fence and go and support Republicans or Trump. It's all going to be about which party, which candidate will be able to maximize those supporters at that moment in time.
Yeah, I think Steve Daines has the benefit of good name ID and good constituent services. And a lot of when you're running for office is kind of what have you done for me lately? And he's been very responsive to constituents, and that goes a long way when you're running for office, and having a record. You know, the politics sometimes in certain states is not as imperative as your personal connection with them. And
That's right.
From what I'm hearing from people out there, Steve Daines has really worked hard to nurture those relationships, and that makes a big difference.
Well, I want to just say thank you guys so much. This has been so incredible. I want to ask you a little bit about the podcast, because obviously listening to it, I loved it. It reminds me a little bit of the civil conversations I have with friends who I disagree with. At a time when all of this is happening in politics, what made you guys think this is what you wanted to do? And, you know, oftentimes on TV, we see people disagreeing and we think they can't possibly go to the green room and really like each other, but you guys seem to. So talk a little bit about how it came together and what you guys are trying to do with it.
That's exactly, Allie, how it came together, because we became really good friends in the green room. But that came from, as you know, Alice and I have done a ton of segments together on CNN, and we sort of became in the last couple of years a staple of New Day on Saturday mornings, where they would bring us together. And we got, and the producers would tell us this, that they got a lot of great feedback from viewers because they saw how passionate, as we did here, each defended our positions without being nasty. We were completely, like, not just civil, but friendly and respectful. And when we agree with one another, we absolutely say it. And when we have to disagree with our own party, we absolutely do that too. And so that is sort of the spirit that we bring to the podcast.
And to further that, you know, I genuinely respect and love Maria, and I respect and love her thoughts, even though she's wrong most of the times. I still respect her for that.
Yeah, she says that.
but we had this segment on Saturday mornings for a long time, and we still do. But when COVID hit, it kind of they stopped and started shifting to COVID. And she and I had talked about doing a podcast. And of course, everyone says you should have your own show. Like, you just go, okay, we're going to have our own show.
Here I am. So
yeah,
true.
It worked where someone reached out. We had done some radio. I had done some, and Maria had done some. And this one podcast producer said, emailed or called and said, "Have you ever thought about doing a podcast?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I have with Maria." And he was like, "Oh my gosh!" And he kind of specializes in, the R&D kind of podcasts. So the first couple ones we did, we did it, and like he helps to kind of like make sure we're not off in the,
he gave us a lot of great advice on how to make it very conversational like it is right now. But when you sit down with the headphones and you're like, okay, now we gotta it's different, right? We get into the groove like that on television and on these things. And I think we found our groove on the podcast. But when we first started out, we had to sort of find the way that was best for us, that would bring us into the groove we know where we are the best.
Yeah, and just for the sake of pimping it, it's hot mics from left to right on all the podcast platforms. But the good thing is we talk politics, but we always wrap up every segment with something positive and meaningful and motivational. You sit there all day and watch all this crap on the internet and TV, but every once in a while there's a glimmer of hope somewhere. So we try to end things with something that makes you smile or laugh or warms your heart instead of makes you want to go, bang your head against the wall.
Well, so I don't want to put you guys on the spot because I haven't asked you, and I didn't ask you to prepare this, but is there something today that you saw that really warmed your heart, or do you want to end this with that? Or if you don't have anything off the top of your head, then I will just close it out right now.
Actually, doing this warms my heart because, again, so many people, especially because having the DNC last night and the RNC this week, all of my friends say, "Oh my God, I'm so disgusted with what's going on, every night the Republican Party." And I'm sure during the DNC, Alice heard from a lot of her friends who probably saying the same thing, or a lot of Republicans probably saying the same thing. And here you have a passionate Republican and a lifelong Republican, a passionate lifelong Democrat. We're both going to vote for the candidates of our party, but yet we can come together and have this very warm, civil, friendly conversation. That warms my heart.
And again, I mentioned it earlier, but something that will stay with me for a long time is the feeling and emotion from the mother of that victim in Wisconsin when she was calling for people to stop the violence because this is not what he would want. And, her saying, "America is great when we act greatly," is something that warms my heart and really kind of makes me, try to be better and try to be more respectful of people. So that's something that stands out with me from, this week.
Well, leaders don't all have to be politicians, right? I think we can all be leaders in our own spaces. And, to the point about PredictIt, what I really love is that it gets people more involved in politics and gets into the nitty gritty and, has people so excited to come on and watch you guys and hear us talk about this. And so that's, it's been a cool part of working with this great company. So anyway, not to plug.
Well, thank you so much for having us on, Allison. It warmed our hearts when you reached out.
Well, it's such a pleasure to see you both. I wish I could see you in person, but next time when I'm in DC,
yes, for sure.
Thank you.
Let's
thank
go
you
have a safe, socially distant coffee.
Yes,
do that.
And I'm glad you're able to get out of the DC bubble and still stay in tune with politics and the fray. It's exciting. I'm really proud of you and excited for you.
Well, thank you. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Allison. Thanks, everybody.
If you look in the chat, we have all the info. Follow Maria, follow Alice, and the info on the podcast. So take care, guys.
Subscribe and rate us. Give us a 5.
Bye, guys. Take care.
Thank you.